Taiwan has certainly become a fracture point for Sino-European relations. Like we were briefly mentioning Lithuania, but maybe we could talk about that. Like, is that situation where Lithuania showed really like a minimal level of support for Taiwan, and China freaked out and essentially launched a trade war with the country? Is that like being taken as a warning for the rest of Europe?
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's had the effect that China wanted it to have. I don't think any other Europe. So I think China got what it wanted, and that I don't see any other European country doing any of this, because the consequences were quite severe. It wasn't just cutting off Lithuania, because Lithuanian direct dependence and exposure to the Chinese market is quite small. It was leaning on others to basically cut Lithuania out of global supply chains by saying, well, if you, big German automaker, include Lithuanian parts, then tough luck. You're not going to be able to import those or export those products, etc. At the same time, I mean, this is, when China talks about how it's opposed to sanctions, that's always a bit funny and hypocritical in that regard, because clearly they have put the most severe sanctions on Lithuania. But the way it's currently being handled, maybe just to quickly talk about that, currently China is basically leaning on Europe to say, well, of course, we have never done anything to Lithuania. They they deny that they're doing anything. But if you wanted this thing that doesn't exist, we think doesn't exist, to go away, you could completely solve everything by renaming the representative office. So that's kind of been the latest.
It's like the stop hitting yourself argument.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's, so you mentioned, threatening German auto manufacturers with not having Lithuanian parts, that kind of thing. Has Europe kind of caved to that?
It's very difficult to get the details. There's been this letter that got leaked where the German Chamber of Commerce and the Baltics wrote to the Lithuanian government saying, look, if you don't improve your relations with China, we're going to have to cut you out of our supply chain. So that leaked. It's been very difficult, at least for me. Maybe some people have more inside information here than I do, but it's been difficult to get at the exact extent, like how much this has happened. According to some people, China has not enforced this very strictly, including because of some pushback. But I personally can't tell you the exact extent, how much of it is enforced, where it's not enforced. I think they've kept it at a level where they can basically keep this as a latent conflict in the background, where Lithuania suffers some from it, but they don't enforce it consistently. So that they will also maybe face less backlash from the suppliers. And they're also, by enforcing it inconsistently, maybe hoping, because the EU has taken this to the WTO. So right now there's this very long WTO process on this. So if China is inconsistent on it, it may also argue that Europe is making this up and this doesn't exist. So it's really hard to get the inside details here unless you work for one of those companies or one of the people involved in the negotiations. But the bottom line is, I think it's being enforced very inconsistently and loosely, so as to keep all options, keep up the pressure, but not cause too much backlash from all of Europe, I think.
So just enough social and psychological pressure to try to make Lithuania cave without getting any backlash themselves.
Sort of. They are still getting backlash, and Lithuania still has not caved. So it's not working, but I think they're keeping this at this low level simmering conflict where it's not at the top of the agenda, but it's still relevant enough for Lithuania to maybe change its policy at some point. It strikes me as a pretty typical way handling these things.
Yeah, it definitely sounds familiar.
Just keeping Lithuania relevant enough for Americans to occasionally look it up on a map.
So, do you think tying this back to Taiwan? Do you think what lessons do you think China has drawn from Russia's invasion of Ukraine? You can maybe round out with that.
Yeah. So one, again, I think I might have mentioned this at some point, but people in Beijing are probably currently studying urban warfare, probably studying the more like defense techniques, such as the one that Finland has for itself, that basically just denies any invading country any movement. So I'm sure people in Beijing are updating their strategies on that. I do think, again, on the positive side, it has certainly I don't know whether people in the Chinese military before were convinced that they could have it easy in any invasion of Taiwan, but it certainly put the possibility of, even if you think you're going to have an easy time, you might not. So it certainly raised apprehension in that regard. But like I said, on the other hand, it has probably, and again, I'm speculating because I don't have any inside briefings from Zhongnanhai or from the People's Liberation Army. The people who argue that the U.S. is not going to intervene, probably have an easier time right now to make that case. Because of the way that in this Ukraine conflict, there's been like a line drawn in the sand, and the way that both Europe and the US have communicated that they're terrified, for good reasons, to go to war with a nuclear power. So there's different conclusions that are going to be drawn from this. And I just hope that the people who argue that this is an unnecessary, stupid, reckless risk are listened to.
Do you think that the sanctions that the US and Europe have put on Russia have had an effect on how China thinks about invading Taiwan?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yes and no. I think they're watching quite closely what the instruments are. And I'm sure that the Chinese government is going to work hard over the next couple of years to make China less dependent on, or less interdependent with the West, which I think it can do to some extent. I think there's going to be limits to what it can do, but it's going to work harder on that plan, which it was already pursuing before the war in Ukraine, right? Like, it was already trying to make itself less dependent on the West, and to have more, basically be able to rely on itself and others that are not considered hostile. So it's going to accelerate that. There is, I think, going to be greater reluctance, both in the US and in Europe, to apply this full set of instruments on China rather than Russia, because China, like our economies, like China is more important for our economies than Russia is, despite any dependence on oil and gas. So I think China probably also knows that there's going to be greater reluctance on the part of Western actors to impose the full spectrum of sanctions. But I'm sure it's taking note, and it's figuring out how to preempt, how to get China a situation where it can have as little impact as possible, while understanding, I think, that they can't completely reduce or eliminate all of these interdependencies.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today and sharing this information.
Thanks for having me.
For anyone watching who would like to, follow you or learn more about what you do, where should they go?
You can find me, on Twitter. You can find me on my employer's website at gmfus.org. And I've written a book together with Clive Hamilton on, CCP strategies to subvert democracies and reshape the world. So I don't know. Usually you can find me on the internet.
Oh, the internet, where everyone's compared to Hitler. Well, really, thank you for joining us today. It's been great.
Thanks for having me.
You know, one thing that I found very interesting in this podcast was the idea that, sort of China's own propaganda is actually like they're falling victim to their own propaganda.
Yeah. Don't drink your own Kool-Aid. That
Yeah.
idea. Yeah.
Well, actually, you know what it reminds me of? Grand Admiral Thrawn. Neither of you guys know? It was a Star Wars expanded universe Imperial general, and his shtick. No, this is good, Matt. I see you sneering over there.
Is this like in a book or something?
It's a book, and now it's part of the new stuff. But
Okay.
who cares about that? Basically, his thing was he could look at like the artwork of a culture and figure out its weaknesses. And so, if you look at like Communist Party, propaganda, its artwork, it's sort of its cultural understanding of things. They view everything through this lens of struggle, that there has to be America as the great enemy. Everything else is just a proxy of this one power. It's limited by this worldview that it's created for itself. And you can sort of understand that and, know how to fight it by understanding its art.
So how would we fight that?
Yeah, how do you fight a country that's run by people who believe in struggle?
Struggle harder? I don't know.
Okay, you were doing really well.
So does Admiral Thrawn have a solution?
I think sometimes he would like use genocide.
Okay.
I mean, he's a bad guy.
We're gonna
This is
stop this metaphor
falling
now
apart
because
now.
it is really
In a way, he was literal Hitler.
Space Hitler.
Space Hitler.
let's not put that on a t-shirt.
No. But it is interesting, the idea that it reminds me of the whole, we were talking a couple podcasts ago about whether they really believe that everybody who criticizes the CCP is part of the CIA or something, or being paid by the CIA.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. Like, if they really believe that Lithuania is a proxy country for America.
Yeah, it's a really limiting worldview, I would say.
Yeah. If only being accused of being funded by the CIA meant the CIA would then see that and then actually give us money. No comment. Okay.
I just want to be here in this moment with you, with us, them. Just feel it.
It's so uncomfortable.